scholarships to local kids. Last year, we collected $92,000 and passed out 26 scholarships to local kids. Each scholarship was about $3,500. The year before that, we collected the previous 4 years, we collected $250,000 and passed out 105 scholarships. Since AF has been in operations, we have collected and distributed a total of $2 million to the local community for STEM education, for scholarships, for different functions, whatnot. So I love doing this because I care about the kids, and it's also fun to see them do their STEM projects. If you go up the, I forget which room it is, but there's a STEM showing up and look at all the robotics and stuff. It's pretty cool. There's maybe 4 or 5 different schools up there. It's really neat. Okay, thank you all for coming. Today, GDIT is going to give us a talk on cloud implementation and cloud security. Our presenters are Dr. Matthew McFadden. Dr. McFadden leads cyber for GDIT and has led numerous DoD cloud implementations and as well drives cloud security strategy supporting DoD environments. He's a certified technical trainer and a previous instructor for the Defense Cyber Training Academy. Kronimus, he's the Senior Director of Cloud for GDIT. He leads cloud services for GDIT, chairs the GDIT Cloud Center of Excellence, and drives the cloud strategy for GDIT. He brings over 25 years of experience and is certified in multiple clouds. There's like this long strain of alphabets after his name. And presents Six Sigma, and we get a lot more alphabets here. So without further ado, please welcome our 2 presenters today. Thank you.
So, good morning. Okay, let's try that one more time. I know it's early, but let's try it one more time. Good morning. Aloha. Even better. So, my name is Neil Kronimus, so thank you for being here. I appreciate it, your time today. Just kind of kick off a little introduction and stuff. So, what we're going to cover today is we're going to cover what is the DoD Cloud Strategy, try to help kind of shed some light on that, talk about cloud, how to get to the cloud, but then more importantly, how do we do the cybersecurity in the cloud? So that's really what we're going to cover today. Right here, this URL, take that down. Everything we're doing today, all the stuff we're going to show you is off that URL. So you don't have to take pictures if you don't want to of each of the slides or whatever. They're all up there on this URL. And so everything we're going to talk about. So make sure you have that. Before I get started, how many people have done the road to HANA? So I did that on Sunday. I flew over to Maui and did that on Sunday, and I didn't realize that there's over 600 curves on the road. I didn't realize that, and I was driving, I rented a Jeep, and some of the roads are not roads, I think. They call them roads, but I'm driving, and what I was thinking was, I'm twisting, turning, I'm going like, man, this is kind of like getting to the cloud. Because you're always hitting a bump, there's a switchback or something, and you just don't know what to expect when you're going to the cloud, because you're going to hit some potholes. You're going to hit rough patches. You got to be paying attention the whole time. So when I was just driving the road, that's really what kind of really hit me there about, hey, I can say this is for today. So, but that's what we're going to cover. And there you go. Oops. So who doesn't know General Dynamics? Anybody? Okay, I don't have to cover this then. So just the one obligatory thing. GDIT, we're the information technology part of GD, the bigger umbrella. And we focus on everything around information technology, mainly cloud, cyber, and AI are the 3 things we focus on. And we're 35,000 people strong. And you can see like that, I said, this is the architecture. So with that said, I'm going to let Matt here talk about the DoD Cloud Strategy, because he lives and breathes it every day.
Sure. So. All right. Give me the clicker of truth here. All right. Good morning. All right. So moving on here. So I spent a lot of time giving a lot of speeches at conference, and somehow it always converges around cloud and cyber. And I think, from a cloud perspective, one of the first things people ask for is, well, how do I secure the cloud? So, as you can see, there's a very, very large market. Every day we're hearing about a new cloud platform. There's various impact levels. There are various sensitivities of data. So poll for the room here. How many people are engaged in the cloud currently? So about half. How many people are trying to go to the cloud in 6 months? A good portion here. So, but I think that the point is there are a lot of options. So over the last couple of years here, we've seen AWS implementation pretty hardy. Oh, I can hold it if you want. No. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. I'll try to be louder. It's where you've heard about the great JEDI contract, and hopefully Azure may get this, as well as Google and Oracle, who's in our audience today. So a lot of what we try to do is navigate the road to HANA to cloud, and I think a lot of it's either kind of the general purpose or fit for purpose. So I want to say every mission really kind of best aligns to a certain cloud, but you have to really figure out what are you trying to do. So maybe if you like SharePoint or Active Directory, Azure might be a better, good solution for you. Or if you're trying to deploy an Oracle database, I think I might choose Oracle. If you are concerned about security and you want to ensure your cloud is in a data center, I might choose MilCloud. So lots of options here, but remember there's different entities, right? So I want to say a lot of the market has been very focused around infrastructure as a service. IaaS is where as we move down that model, there's more flexibility at the infrastructure level. As we move down to the software as a service, there's less complexity, it's more efficient, but you don't have some of the functionality you need. So does anyone know what FAAS is? Function as a service, that's right. And I want to say that's something that I foresee in the next 5 years, folks are really going to, and that's kind of that whole microservices model. Rather than deploy this whole complex enterprise or application, what is the specific function that you need to serve, your mission? And then we have this great thing called FedRAMP. So we do a lot of working to figure out how do you inherit a FedRAMP package as part of your ATO process, and we'll talk about that. But the point is there's some barriers for these cloud service providers to get to the DoD, right? So typically they're going to go through the FedRAMP process. The DoD sits in what's called the JAB, the Joint Authorization Board, and then basically DoD issues what's called a DoD provisional authorization. As with any mission owner type environment, you are required to get a ATO and go through the RMF process. That's what that provisional authorization is. The PA basically just allows you to inherit a control set of the cloud, but it hopefully will shorten your process to get an ATO. But we'll talk a little bit about that. So point of this is there's lots of different clouds. You need some help navigating the waters based upon what the mission is. But also the data impact levels are an important part of that. There's a DoD Cloud Strategy out there. If you haven't taken a look at it, it's out there. And I think it's very, very important to understand what the DoD is trying to do. So just quote, DoD will remain a multi-cloud complexity and environment because the DoD's mission requires DoD to have multiple clouds from multiple vendors. And I think across the market, across the federal space, and being that we're GDIT, we probably have some of the largest cloud brokerages and cloud environments across the federal space. And I think in the last few years, and Neil can definitely chime in, I feel like it's okay, let's get to the cloud, and they were choosing, one cloud service provider, but now, mission owners want multiple clouds because they have multiple services that they need to consume. So a lot of the challenges is how do you design an architecture, an enterprise, and an accreditation process that helps support multiple clouds in an environment. And there's a lot of things that we're doing around that. But I think it's important to understand, what this means. It's going to be more integrated. It's about driving efficiency and focused on, what the mission is. So, but if you go through the strategy, there's some common themes, right? So, what's the onboarding process? How does that differ from AWS versus Oracle versus Azure? Integrated cyber defense operations is an important piece. So a lot of times we're very focused on, okay, how do we provide defensive cyber ops for a single cloud environment? Well, how do I now design a multi, cloud security environment? It's challenging. There's a lot of engineering considerations, right? So it's like how, think about log data. If I have log data in Azure and log data in AWS, well, how do I centralize that in one location? Do I want to build, I want to say edge environment security platforms, or do I want to all funnel them into one CSP? What is the right CSP to funnel the data to? It just lots of things. We're seeing a lot of stuff around shared services. So, okay, we stand up a cloud environment. Well, what are some of the common services that they need? That could be Active Directory. That could be DNS. That could be email. Backup services is actually a pretty common one. And we see a lot of stuff around tool integration and automation. So you've probably heard about the JAKE, the Joint AI Center, where they're looking at AI concepts. And cloud and AI is definitely converging, and a lot of those tool sets are important. And I guess the other thing is just hybrid cloud. So we're never going to get rid of all of our on-premise data per se. I mean, we're trying to migrate some of that to the cloud, but there will always be a need to design a hybrid type multi-vendor approach. So how many folks are familiar with the DoD impact levels? All right, good portion. So I want to say this is probably one of the biggest drivers between the cloud selection. And a lot of times it's just kind of walking through and understanding what the data is. Ultimately, from a security perspective, we're trying to protect the data, not the servers, not the, it's all about the data. So one of the first things that you do as part of the risk management framework process is step one, classify the data. There's this huge questionnaire and stuff that you go through. The easiest way to kind of think through this is if you basically have public non-PII data, you're impact level 2. And that typically maps to a FISMA, FedRAMP moderate environment. Anything higher, PII, national security data, you're typically at IL5. So there's actually an overlay that actually you could begin to map some of the cloud services. And we'll talk about what's in scope and things like that. But impact level 2 is US East commercial cloud AWS. So you can use some of the commercial cloud type services in Amazon. Versus once you move down to 4 and 5, then that's when you start looking at GovCloud. And the idea is it's a physically separated environment. It's multi-tenant to just DoD customers. This is where you require the DoD cap, which is a very daunting process sometimes. We'll talk through that. But and there's actually, from an OPSEC perspective, you're supposed to have single scope background investigations to actually work on that stuff. So these are all things that we navigate through. But I think the point is you really just need to understand the data that you're trying to protect. And that what helps align to what cloud and what services that you can consume. So remember, there's a cloud and then there's underlying services. Not all the services that are offered actually meet the impact levels. The other important point is actually not, and even though you have a, say, GovCloud, so remember there's multiple regions and multiple availability zones, not all the services in a region may meet some of these IO requirements. So sometimes it gets really, really complicated, and I haven't, designed the one-stop flow chart that shows, how to make that selection, but I think we should get to that. Sure.
Are you going to
Question.
take questions at the end?
Yeah, I'll take questions whenever you guys have them.
So just a quick observation based on that last slide. One of the problems that a lot of my clients are having is that the tools that they want to use in the cloud or for weapon-based systems, IT systems, a lot of them are on SIPR, and we need software solutions with IL6, and there's not, or there hasn't been very much available there. So what we've been forced to do is go to our AO and say, well, this stuff isn't IL6, so we'll look at it ourselves, and basically we have these high-risk ATO packages because of that. Does the DoD, here's the question, sorry, does the DoD plan involve getting more tools, IL6, so we can use some of this stuff in SIPR? Because the stuff that's rushing to the cloud, from my client's perspective, it's not starting at the public non-critical stuff, it's starting at the weapon system or secret level.
Yeah. So I think always the caveat I like to do in the intro is I do not speak for DoD.
Right. Of course.
However, I know a lot about DoD, so this is my opinion. So I would say a lot of times it's, so remember you have an AO. That AO is responsible for accepting the risk. And I think with this, especially, there's a lot more flexibility. Some AOs are more flexible than others. So I think where the impact levels come in is, slowly and surely we're seeing more cloud service providers offer these tools at the higher levels, but then again, they normally start out at the lower levels. And that's the reality. That's how it's likely going to be. I want to say, for the most part, a lot of the tools that we're deploying within the mission owner environments are within kind of the infrastructure as a service. And we're building accreditations around those. So one of the things that we're doing is, and we'll talk about this later, is we're building against the secure cloud computing architecture, which defines a capability, a function. It doesn't define a tool. It's all capabilities based. So if you can prove that you're aligning to that capability, then it's likely to drive the accreditation. So,
And then, and then the other thing is, like I said, all the CSPs are working towards IL6. They're not there yet. That's where JEDI's going. JEDI will be IL6 once they're fully operational. That's the plan. MilCloud 2.0 is supposed to be IL6. They're IL5 now. They'll be 6 soon, and they'll bring the appropriate tools. I mean, AWS is working on one, Azure is working on one. I mean, all of them are all working on an IL6 capability because they know they got to keep moving up. But they got to start with the base first, and it just takes time to get there, unfortunately. But we'll get there, and then you'll have those tools. But it's right. I mean, even if you look at what Azure is doing, they're going to start off with infrastructure as a service first, then move their way up the stack to platform and software. So, but that's where they're going. So, will they be there this year? No. Next year, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's all about a shared responsibility model, and we'll talk through that a little bit. The other thing to mention is DoD reciprocity. So we see some unique things happening with FedRAMP. So recently there was just a memo released to accept other agencies' FedRAMP as part of the ATO process, with no need for that kind of provisional approval. So, for example, if the Department of Veterans Affairs accredits this, FedRAMP moderate IL2 application, DoD can essentially inherit that. Right now, it's only at the impact level 2, but the whole idea with driving this FedRAMP stuff is, we want to reuse ATOs. We don't want to spend 6 to 9 months reaccrediting things that essentially have already been accredited. The other thing I always like to show is, all these cloud variables. And, so AWS, how many folks realize that they have 165 specific services? mean, that's a lot. Typically, the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, they have an EC2 instance, all right, but can you name all of 165? So then, keep going down the impact levels. IL2, IL4, IL5. Well, IL5, there's probably, 25 services. So slowly as you see, the CSPs have adopted this model where, they roll out their stuff in commercial, they move it to GovCloud, then they move it to, their specific regions, and, slowly and surely, it's accessible globally. But remember, there's that accreditation process and that DoD provisional authorization. So I guess the thing you need to know is, that when you're getting something accredited, you have to understand what services that are available in what region. And the question I always pose is, well, what do you consider a service? So that's a funny concept. I could probably talk an hour on that. But then from an Azure perspective, so how many regions? They have 54 and across 140 countries. Well, back to the regions, how many of those are IL2? How many of those are IL4? How many of those are IL4? 5. So there's a lot of good information out there from the CSPs that will kind of show you, what their foothold is, and remember, we're an Indo-Pac, right? So, if I'm designing a cloud service, or for the Pacific, wherever, I have to be very considerate of what services I can deploy where, So, and the same thing is, as we move up the stack to more of these function and software as a service, there's very different things that we need to do to actually protect that service. So we'll talk about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Neil, and he is going to go through some of the concepts around cloud management.
So before I get into that, so how many buzzwords that Matt just said just went, like,
I forgot a definition.
yeah, like what's a region? What's an availability zone? Does everybody know what those are? Okay, what it is, so all the cloud service providers break things down in regions: East, West, Central, Europe, all those type of things. Inside of those regions, they have multiple data centers. The data centers typically are called availability zones. So that way, if you're deploying your application into the East region and I span multiple availability zones, it means I'm putting it really in multiple data centers for redundancy, for resiliency. So that's really what it's all about, is having those different regions. And if I really want to go from make a big thing, I can go multiple regions. So if my users are across all, say, the US, I put in multiple regions.
So is there an availability zone in Hawaii for some of these cloud providers?
Unfortunately, no. There are no availability zones today, right now. That's one of the places that's lacking, because the one thing with the cloud is really latency of your application. And when you're having to go from here all the way back to Seattle to get to a region, that's an issue. That's the reason why let me go back here, talked about really the edge computing. Because that's really what we're talking about here is we need something here that can be a slight weight cloud, that you can do stuff here fast, and then maybe the bulk of the processing whenever you can go back where latency is not an issue. So that's one of the things here from the strategy and stuff. Before I go on, I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. I don't mind doing the Cloud 101. I want to make sure everybody understands what cloud is and what it isn't. So feel free to ask questions. If not, I'll ask you questions, because I have no problem asking questions. So anything? Go ahead.
I'm a newbie. Why do I want to use the cloud versus what I've been doing for the last 100 years?
Yeah. So the question is, why would I, instead of using my current model that I'm used to with the legacy data centers and everything, go to the cloud? Why would I want to do that? The easy answer is just a scalability of resources. So think about how you design an application today. You thought about what would be my worst case scenario for I'm going to have this many users hitting at this, but this is only at peak time that happens maybe 4 times a year or something. But you bought enough servers, storage, hardware, networking, all that stuff for those 4 times a year. The other times it wasn't being used. It was wasted capacity. But what happens if you go over that number? So that 4th time of the year, I was expecting 500, 750 users hit it. Well, then I'm going to see a lag in the system. So, and what do? I go out and buy more stuff, attach onto it. Ooh, well, that's 2 years ago. That stuff's out of date now. I got to buy other stuff. And so you keep buying capital expenditure models. With the cloud, what I can do is I can have it what they call auto scale and say, hey, if I see too many users, I'll just spin up another server and another one and another one. Oh, now my demand's going down. I'll spin them down. So I don't have to buy anything. It's all an operational OpEx model now. So that's one of the biggest things is just that scalability. Legacy data centers couldn't provide right away because you had to go buy stuff and install it, configure it, all that stuff. Now it's really just, I hit a button and there it is. That's one. The other is visibility. Can you tell me in your things, so if I have this application, how much this application is costing me? How much power? How much HVAC in the data center it's using? How much is it getting utilized? Could you tell me all those type things? Probably not, because they came out of different budgets. So one budget was running the data center, one budget was the application. So it was hard to tell me what the total cost of ownership was for that application. With the cloud, putting it in there, I can see that because all my prices, the cost is rolled into that. So I can see how much. Then I can add on the labor. Here's my admin supporting it, stuff like that. So I can get a bigger idea of total cost of ownership. Yes, I'll have some spikes up and down because of the service, but I'll be able to trend where that's going. So that'll help me for my budgeting costs later on. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I know you don't speak for a DoD, but going after budget and cost, because of the elasticity and usage and metering, how do you advise DoD clients on, you have set up this much budget to...
Right. So for those who can't hear, so his question is, first off, since I don't speak for DoD, but the second thing is more like, how do you budget? When budgets are elastic and stuff, because your application is seasonal or whatever, and if it's not steady state, how do you budget? And the answer is it's hard. You really can't. You have to take a swag the first time. That's when you do, you take a look at your application in your data center today, before you migrate to the cloud, what's your swag, what's your kind of cost, your run rate today? And then from there, when you move to the cloud, you start monitoring that. Did it go down? Did it go up? And you just got to start there and you got to adjust. I know you got to do a year out and stuff, but it's the best guess. When you start seeing the trending, then you can see a better thing. But there's no easy answer to that.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll add is like that you kind of want to do that engineering assessment. So some cloud service providers, MilCloud being one of them, they won't charge you for some of the ingress and egress fees of sending data in and out, is where AWS, there are costs for that. So it really depends on what your mission is, what are you trying to do. You got to price it out, and we'll talk through, I think, some of the pricing calculators to help you with that.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things we have on the links on the website is links to the pricing calculators for the different CSPs, so you can actually go in there and estimate. But the thing with the calculators you got to be careful of, they're just estimates because there's always hidden fees. So like I said, data's always in is free, but trying to pull data out, there's a cost. So there's 2 metaphors I use. One is Hotel California, and the other one is the cocaine dealer with the nickel bag. Yeah, come on, try it out to get you hooked. So, but
50 hours free.
yeah, so anyway, but yeah, so you got to be careful when you're doing those estimates. It gives you a good estimate, but there's always fees you got to figure out. Because like those data charges, and that's where when you're doing your discovery of your application, you're thinking about moving, is you really got to look at what is my application talking to today? How much data goes in and out of those servers and stuff, over what ports and stuff, because They got to factor that into the calculation when you move to the cloud. Because we found a lot of places, they move to the cloud and they're going like, wow, this is more expensive. And it's because they didn't realize this was talking. Or this was talking over here and there's more data or more transactions. And guess what? The cloud providers charge for transactions as well. Now, it seems trivial because it's like 5 cents per million transactions, but you don't realize how much that transactions that application has been doing. That's the reason upfront app rationalization is very important. So, any other questions?
You had cybersecurity as a tenant. When you moved to cloud, do you see that as the posture improving or degrading?
So the questions around cybersecurity and how is it improving or degrading and stuff. And the short answer is it depends. I hate that answer, but it depends because you got to look at your current tool sets. Everything, not just the cybersecurity, but how you're doing O&M and everything. And are those tools cloud ready? Or can we use some cloud native tools and integrate into my current existing set? So not only do we have to do rationalization of the application before we move to the cloud, we got to do a rationalization of all of our tools that we're using for O&M, for cyber, including our policies and procedures. Because if there's an incident, what does your policy say for an incident? Seize a server? Well, guess what? In the cloud, you're not seizing a server because that server probably doesn't exist today. It was here and then over here and over here. So you got to relook at everything, policies, procedures, tools, all that stuff before you make that leap. You want to?
Yeah, I would say that the one takeaway is all of your assets are now within the cloud service provider. So that's the greatest strength. I'm a big caveat of, you can't defend what you don't know you have. At least in the cloud, you know what you have, so you can defend it. So that's the number one takeaway.
Do you have a question?
I do not.
Any other questions?
You mentioned about elasticity and scaling.
Mm-hmm.
Scaling on demand. How does DoD take advantage of that capability if all DoD servers require an identity certificate? And that's a manual process to, let's say, DISA. Let's say your agency doesn't have an on-prem, let's say, CA server to deliver those certificates. How do you scale for that?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so there's a couple things, right? So the whole idea with elasticity is, you can essentially turn off servers that you don't need at any given time. So there are definitely some ways that we can best engineer. So one of the first questions that we probably get asked is like Active Directory. How do you inherit accounts and certificates? So there's some ways where, hey, we realize with the mission owner, we don't need to replicate AD, right? They just need to validate, I guess, with like a CAC card. So we could use something like OCSP to validate the credentials and username to access the application and don't have to necessarily replicate this huge infrastructure. So, there's always that engineering assessment, but I think part of it is it's also a culture shift, right? So a lot of entities, I'm going to say across DoD, are always looking at kind of that capital expense up front, and now it's how do you pay for on-demand usage. And I think it's very important for you to talk with your acquisition shops to help structure a way to help drive that model, if that makes sense. All right, poll for the room. I mean, do you guys feel like there's a lot of challenges around acquisition and understanding that? Some head nods?
Mm-hmm. He's talking about certificates, not acquisition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I need a root level certificate
Yeah.
that's not self-signed at scale, so that I can have, the ATO police not track it down.
It all depends. I've seen it very different from Air Force to Navy.
It goes back to the RMF and what risk when you get the ATO is that's really what it is. Some Navy does a lot more and stuff, and the certificates, when this thing sums up, they just get a certificate automatically, some don't. So it is different, depends on each group. Not a great answer, but I know what you're saying. It's a deeper conversation than we have time here. We'll be happy to talk to you later on that one. So, Keep the questions coming. I'm going to keep moving on. But if you have questions, interrupt me, please, okay? Because this is exactly what I want. Is you guys, we're trying to help you guys learn. Hopefully take away something that you hadn't seen before or heard before. So this is, like I said, a encapsulation of the DoD strategy, that PDF. But if you notice on the cloud themes here, what's missing? You notice something missing here? So this is, it's hard to see the diagram, but this is all the enablers to get you to the cloud. The problem is it doesn't talk about what's the architecture, okay? Or some of the cloud service providers call them design patterns of how I'm going to utilize the cloud. I mean, it's perfect right here. It says it's what you choose to build on top. That's what the DoD strategy is. They're putting the cloud in place as enablers, the multi-cloud, the hybrid, but they're not telling you how to shape it. They want you to shape it. So that's a whole different thing. So what's that architecture going to look like? And how is it going to be able to satisfy not only this application, but all my applications? And then how am I going to get there with that? How am I going to build it? So that's one of the things you got to take. This is a good starting point, but it's not an ending point. That's the reason I keep talking about the app rationalization. When you're moving to the cloud, the first thing is discovering what you have, rationalizing those applications, and prioritizing what you want to move, what you want to keep on-prem, what you want to try to do hybrid or do multi-cloud, whatever. That's the first thing you got to do, is that upfront work. Whoever's created a database instance and schemas, 90% of the work when you're creating a database is that schema. Same thing with the cloud. 90% of the work is figuring out what you have, what you want to move, and creating that architecture, that design pattern for that. That's 90% of the work. Actually moving it to the cloud is not as hard as you think. But getting it there, I mean, doing that up front, knowing what you have is the most important. When you know what you have, you got to prioritize. That's when you start planning and doing the migration. And there's multiple ways to do that. You could do a lift and shift, which is just picking up, putting it over. That's what people started with and stuff. But now we're seeing more folks moving it over and then upgrading. Maybe operating systems or software or something. That's lift and shift and enhance. So some people, if you on the other end, if you really want to make use of the cloud, is redesign it and write it with cloud native tools. The problem with that approach is, while that gives you the biggest bang for the buck, it's also the longest time to the cloud. Plus, do you have the funds to rewrite this application that's been running for 30 years? Maybe, maybe not. So a lot of people try to get it to the cloud, then optimize it once it's there, or do a little bit of enhancements before that. So there's multiple ways to get there. But whenever you do, you got to make sure the back-end folks, the service desk folks, your admins, the end users all getting know what you're doing. Communication plan is critical here, because you don't want the service desk to come in, you did a migration to the cloud and something didn't work, and the service desks are getting flooded with calls and they don't know what to do because they didn't know what happened. So there's a lot of back-end stuff. Keeping the security folks happy is very critical as well. So, and then once you're in the cloud, you're not done. Once that application's moved over, you want to monitor it, because there's ways that you can tweak it to optimize it to make it run more efficiently. And when you make it run more efficiently, that's when you're going to start seeing potential cost savings. So I'm going back here. Think about architecture. Think about those design patterns. Okay? The other thing, is how do I do cloud management? And so there's 4 key elements to cloud management, and I don't care if it's a single cloud or multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, private cloud, public cloud, I don't care. These four key tenets here. You got to have automation, you got to have the brokerage piece, you got to have governance, and you got to have security. Of course, when I tell everybody that, I get the things like, why do I need to do brokerage if I'm using a single cloud? Well, if you've ever done a cloud, when you move to the cloud, you create cloud accounts or cloud subscriptions. Well, think about it. Are you just going to have one cloud account for your whole enterprise? No, you're going to have multiple accounts. There's one agency that I can't name that runs AWS, but you know how many cloud accounts they have on AWS? They have over 2,000 cloud accounts. So that's brokerage in a different sense, because it's a single cloud, but a lot of different accounts. With the governance, if you notice, I put governance first because that is the most important thing. You want to make sure the right people are doing the right things. If you notice, compliance and policy, cost optimization. So, because once you're there, because we found a lot of people that moved to the cloud, the early adopters, it cost them more money. Well, why did it cost them more money? You got to keep an eye on that spend. There are tools out there to help you with that. If you're on Azure per se, there's a cost and billing module. If you're on Oracle, Oracle has the similar thing. Google has it. So all of the cloud tools provide that. Now, if you want to aggregate it together, well, that's a different story. You probably need a third-party tool to come in and help with the billing to do multiple clouds. But that's important because you want to see your spend. Because I don't know if you've ever seen, anybody's ever seen an Amazon bill come through? An Amazon bill is a flat file with a whole bunch of services, and unless you can know which group did what, it's hard. Tagging is very important here. And that's another thing that's called cloud tagging. That means putting tags in the resources to identify the group, security level of the data, whatever. You can come up with your own tagging scheme. There's recommendations out there, but that's very important there. The brokering that's the provisioning piece. What services are going to provision, a dashboard to be able to see what utilizations are, service catalogs, stuff like that. The other thing is automation. So how do we make sure we keep the configurations in spec, okay, for compliance and policy and stuff? Because if we automate the builds, going back to DevOps, Sec DevOps model here, we can keep configuration management in check. So I'm going back to idle here. So, and then capacity, resource planning, all that kind of stuff. You're talking the billing question you asked about that. So that's where this comes in thing. If I monitor the application, I can see what capacity loads, I can see trends coming, okay? And then cyber, biggest thing, so it's got to be right here with it. It's not an afterthought, it's embedded right from the start. If you look at AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle, IBM, all the major cloud providers, they invest billions of dollars in cybersecurity in their clouds to make sure they're secure, both physical from the data center perspective and logical. So there's no bleed over. The tenant stays within the tenant. Nobody can go in and try to get to somebody else's. But I'm serious, all these providers spend billions of dollars on the security here. Sometimes I can say, if you ever gone into any of those data centers, it's almost more secure than your legacy data centers of today, if not more. Okay, so the cyber part, because that was always the number one reason, why don't you want to go to the cloud? They always said security, security. Well, that was heard by the cloud service providers, and they've responded in kind. So like I said, they're more secure than what you have today. So, and I'm getting nods from the Oracle guys here, so I must be saying something right. But the main thing is, this is cloud management. This is whether I'm doing management of services such as virtual machines, storage, but what about the data? Not just the buckets or whatever, but the data. So making sure the data is there as well. You got to follow these same tenets. Now, I kind of went through all this stuff by just that one slide, but here's a breakdown. Like I said, go to the URL, the stuff's up there. So, but you can see here about compliance, the cost optimization and stuff like that. There's a lot of tools out there to help with cost optimization. Turbonomic, Cloud Checker, Apogee, there's a whole bunch of different ones. Same thing with the brokerage, the dashboards and stuff. Do I use a CMP? Do I use an ITSM tool for my dashboards? It's up to you. So whether I'm a ServiceNow shop, I could do stuff there, or BMC, or Surewell, or maybe I use a cloud management platform such as a Cloud Vault, or a VM, VRA from VMware, or a Jam Cracker, or a Scalar. There's multiple products out there. What's the best for you? It depends. You got to look at what am I trying to do with it? What am I trying to show and everything? So you need to just go and do some research on that from that perspective. And that's one model. If you think about this, this is kind of like taking the way we've done, take a legacy data center and doing services with the service desk and requiring thing. There's a new trend that's starting out now of saying, hey, Why are we taking an old school idea from the data center and putting this portal in front of it? Well, it's all about the developers, right? And developing the new code. Even if it's a COTS product that I'm just installing on a thing, that's still code. Why not let the code drive the automation in the brokerage, in the management? So instead of going to a portal and I request a 3-tier architecture like this, let the software application say, hey, I need this to work, and automate that process. So when the developer goes in to fix code, that's where it is. It's not through a self-service portal. It's the developer in that application. So that's a different thought process. That's still maturing, but it's a new one out there. Of course, automation we talked about, because the more you automate, less chance of, fat fingering something. All the cloud service providers have a portal where I can click, 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 which is great to spin up a machine, but if I got to spin up 1,000 of them, I don't want to be sitting there clicking, clicking, clicking. It'd be better off to automate it, write a little script or whatever. And then you got to monitor. And that's what we're going to spend, Matt's going to spend the rest of today is around the cyber piece of how do we monitor it and manage it to make sure things are going appropriately. Questions so far?
So you're referring to the tools within the CSP?
Sometimes, yes. Because think about it. If I'm going to use, say, AWS, for example, I have CloudTrail, CloudWatch. Those are free services. Why not use those? But I got to integrate it into something else to get the bigger enterprise picture. Azure has their security center. That's a free tool. Why not make use of what it is? I mean, they designed it for their architecture, so it's going to give you the best results. But now I got this and this, I got to bring them together. And Matt's going to go into that a lot more. So, any other questions? Keep moving. 5-minute stretch break.
All right. We're going to go from 0 to 60 pretty quick here. We're going to get pretty deep. And then at the end here, I mean, we'll stick around. I'm going to go through some hands-on demo stuff just to show you a lot of what we're kind of talking about here. So the important thing is, the cyber mission doesn't really change now that we're moving to the cloud, right? So, we have to adapt to the next cyber threat landscape. But, what does that mean? So a lot of it is around how do we automate our cyber defense, as well as, how do we drive, those more of those cloud-enabled tools. So as I mentioned earlier, if our assets are in the cloud, we can defend against it. And the big trend that we're seeing is now these cloud-native tools, they're basically providing cloud security tools native to the environment. So, I don't have to necessarily deploy a web application firewall. I could use maybe some of the native services. However, caveat, there's considerations around, are they accredited at whatever your impact level are? Some of the defensive cyber capabilities may not quite be there with some of the native tools. So maybe you're used to using Palo Altos or Cisco Firepowers or F5s for your WAFs. My professional opinion is they're probably a little bit farther ahead than some of the native tools. But at the same time, there's some cost and flexibility challenges. So anyway, but the point is the threat landscape is changing. Now that we're moving to the cloud, we have to forecast for hybrid environments, multi-clouds. Most of the time, there's an operational component. So being the cyber director, I go around to all of our largest cyber programs, and some of these programs have 50 to 100 tools in them. Simple math, if you have 10 people managing 100 tools, well, one person is an expert for 10 tools. I think there could be some challenges with doing effective cyber operations. So we really want to minimize and standardize kind of what those capability sets are. And there's a lot of, we're trying to leverage more AI machine learning. A lot of times folks ask for AI, but what they're really asking for is automation. And they're kind of synonymous, but they're not. So there's a big thing around what's called SOAR that's driving in a lot of the cyber market today. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. So I always start out with this slide. I mean, life is hard as a cyber defender, right? So ultimately, we're trying to protect our customer data. You know, we have insider threat. There could be enterprise systems. We mentioned mission systems. They're platform systems. And then, you know, we have all these, we have individual actors, opportunist groups, state-sponsored actors, you know, all of those nice cyber threat intelligence reports, all trying to steal our data. And now our data, you know, essentially lives in the cloud. So I kind of see 4 key components to help drive our cyber strategy. The first part is you have to have a good workforce. And having a workforce that understands some of the nuances between the different CSPs is probably important. You have to drive operations around it. It's all about limiting your attack surface. So, you know, cloud is an enabler for that, as well as some of the enhanced cyber tools. You know, cloud is also an enabler for that. But as I always like to say, this is my favorite slide here. It doesn't matter how many resources you have, you know, if you don't know how to use them, they'll never be enough. And, you know, this applies to the cloud. And unfortunately, when we're talking about elasticity and auto-scaling, when we have thousands of assets now that we're trying to spool up in the cloud, you know, it's really driving all this, you know, all of it around automation, right? And we have to be very effective with our cyber resources. So driving automation, making sure they're focused on those tier 2, tier 3 events. You know, they're not focused on all these trivial logs and all of that stuff. So that's kind of what we're strategizing around. But you know, it's also what do you drive is you know, good cyber hygiene. So you know, from that standpoint, I mean, we kind of look at that as kind of 3 areas. So cyber operations, you may have heard this concept of zero trust architecture. There are some pilots going on within, I know, DoD. And actually, NIST just came out with their 800 series draft publication around zero trust. So a lot of what we're trying to do is drive a kind of the zero trust architecture strategy around our cloud service provider design. It's also important to have a capability framework to help drive, you know, what our cyber capabilities are. And, you know, there's the governance, compliance, paper-based security, and our technical cyber capabilities that, you know, helps drive what our cyber hygiene is. And, you know, if you're not familiar, there's kind of different components to it. From a compliance standpoint, it's all around the risk management framework. You know, we're also doing continuous monitoring controls, but these also align to kind of the FedRAMP, the impact levels. As whereas on the left-hand side, don't get confused that NIST released their NIST Cybersecurity framework. I think there's actually a session later today where one of the folks from Amazon are going to go through some of the NIST Cybersecurity framework controls related to AWS, which I thought was interesting. And then this is just from the cyber scorecard, some of the things that they're looking at, right? So strong authentication, hardening devices, reducing attack surface. You know, these are all things that are, you know, the cloud will help enable and kind of enforce. But, you know, I think it's also important to kind of help drive, you know, what that, you know, cyber hygiene is for the cloud for your organizations. So this is where the fun stuff comes in. Well, what cyber capabilities do I need when I move to the cloud? So I think the biggest realization is that the things that you've been doing on premise, you just are very, very different moving to the cloud. And as with, you probably hear, never lift and shift, you know, your applications into the cloud. Same with your cyber tools. You know, don't lift and shift them, but think about some unique ways to help engineering them. So, what if I told you cloud is just someone else's computer? It really is. and that's kind of how I view it, right? It's, you know, it's a virtualized computer to some degree, but you know, there are some customers where, you know, we've had to look at some of the hardware considerations and how do we get some of these impact levels. So we have a bunch of strategy areas that, you know, we're trying to drive towards, I think, automated cyber defense, autonomous cyber defense is probably one of the most important considerations out there. It's that scalability standpoint. We can't scale effectively unless we're automating a lot of this stuff, as well as driving some of the AI and machine learning tools. So we're focused on prediction. Yes?
So, as we were discussing earlier with the CSPs, so the CSPs are doing a lot of the cyber security portions of it. Where we come in as this is concerned, are we ensuring that they're implementing these different applications, or?
So, I think part of it, what I mentioned before, is there's a shared responsibility model, right? So the CSPs are going to provide security for their underlying infrastructure, but we're responsible for everything that we're putting in the infrastructure. So we still have to do those cyber missions and cyber capabilities. So that's kind of where the inheritance model comes in. From I want to say, it depends on the application, but like just for the infrastructure, they're doing their things, but some of those standards, like that we have to do with the mission owner to meet some of the DoD requirements are different. So I think the important thing is, the DSSP's cybersecurity responsibility is what accredits on the FedRAMP that you can inherit their controls, but we have that kind of mission owner responsibility, to what we need to do to get our, ATO as part of our map.
Yeah, think about what the CSPs are doing. They're accrediting and they're cybering all of the base infrastructure, the hardware components and stuff, the facility, that kind of stuff. The stuff you build on top of it, your applications and stuff, they're not going to touch that. That's your responsibility. How are you going to monitor the application and manage the application? It's different.
So one of the things I mentioned, and that's a great question. So one of the things that DISA came out with last year is what's called the Secure Cloud Computing Architecture, or SCCA. And it's a functional requirements design guide that says, you must, well, you're not required, but you should have these capabilities as part of, your cloud, your cloud environment. And we'll talk through about those. But I think the main piece is, so one of the things that we did at GDIT is help drive, like, what is a capability set that helps drive that capability set. So I definitely recommend going to DISA's site and pulling down the SCCA. And they break it up into kind of like 4 functional areas. So they have a virtual data center security stack, VDSS, the VDMS, the cloud access point. So, if we look at like say a managed services set, well, we may need common DNS services. We may need, Active Directory. From a security stack perspective, we may need a common IDS IPS. We may need a common, WAF. But the idea is if we can build a core infrastructure or core security stack, other mission owners can actually inherit that as part of kind of in core services. So the idea is, it should shorten your accreditation timeline, and it'll provide you a kind of a similar capability stack amongst, your entities. So, the challenge is like, who has ownership of the assets, right? So my goal, if I own the enterprise, is I wouldn't want every mission owner to replicate cybersecurity services, because it's going to take time, it's going to increase the cost, and it's going to increase, decrease your ability to deploy, applications. So if I could build a common set of capabilities and provide that at a core level, and that's similar to what DISA is actually doing today, but we're seeing this adopted more like, for instance, like the Navy cloud brokerage, they're building their own stack so they can have a common capability set amongst mission owners. So just some things to talk about, but there's some enablers of that. So one, it helps modernize your cyber defense capabilities. Two, it drives the automation standpoint, orchestration, and also the other important piece is about integration. But hey, go ahead.
So I have a 2-part question.
Sure.
Based on something I'm struggling with, right? So section 235 in the Secure Cloud Computing Architecture calls for
Yes.
So, question one is, where do you see that capability falling? Is it in VCAP or is it in BDSS? And then question two, how are you meeting this requirement, right?
All right.
There's a lot of throughput, there's gonna be a lot of storage involved, so.
All right, so that's a very, very good question. So one of the most common requirements is you have to have full packet capture. And the number one question is, well, what do you consider full packet capture, and where do you deploy full packet capture? So I've seen it very literally where we just have to have packet capture all over the network. The reality is that's probably not cost effective. So to store 90 days of PCAP traffic across every asset, I mean, you better have a blank check. So I've seen it in tiers, right? So typically at the BCAP or the ingress egress of the perimeter, you know, we'll able to be, you know, we can deploy that. Typically we'll store like 30 to 90 days in like a S3 bucket or something like that. Or some customers have made a decision where, you know, if you're using something like FireEye or you have an agent on a system, that's good enough to, if you need to collect it. So typically, if there's an incident, then, you know, hey, we know we need to create, you know, to capture PCAP on that box. So one of the very unique things that CSPs are doing now is they're actually building that capability within their VPCs. So I know AWS is trying to roll that out, but I don't think they're quite there yet for GovCloud. So you can attach to a VPC and forward logs.
So the AFCEA calls for 30 days. That's not a hard requirement for mission owners?
I think it is, and I think it's more for the CSSPs
Okay.
to do their job.
If you have an incident and then you turn it on post-incident, you don't have the data to go to forensics, right?
Yeah, but I think it's also, there's the difference of the east-west traffic versus the north-south. So north-south, I mean, you pretty much want to really be capturing the north-south. So that's egress out of whatever your perimeter is. The east-west is probably a little bit more flexible. But that's where, so just, obviously there's lots of vendors out there. Gigamon is probably one of the top ones we see. Native CSPs are rolling that out, as well as, you know, if you're deploying virtual Palos or F5s, I mean, you can also do that too. So anyway, sorry, long story short. We could talk about that all day. I get that question a lot, by the way. So just from a cyber stack, you know, so if you're building a cyber stack aligning to the SCCA, here's what kind of the components look like of how they would map out. So, you know, you need to have endpoint protection, vulnerability scanning, you know, domain name service, as well as like data center security, full packet capture. There's SSL break-in and inspect requirements. So, you know, the idea is, you know, today when you're moving to the cloud, do you have these capabilities in place? And they can be, most of the time, we're helping build that modular capability. Some vendors are, you know, are kind of best in breed for some of these capabilities. The one thing that we see is typically the CSSPs, so that's the 24th Air Force, Fleet Cybercom, you know, Army, you know, they have maybe specific requirements, right? So like they may use Cisco Firepowers. So we want to help, but I think the point is our job is to be an enabler for them, right? And so here's some examples of some of the capabilities, just kind of at a glance of, you know, what you would be looking at. So there's a lot, but, you know, at some degree, you know, we have to be holistic. And then, you know, the other thing is when we look at some of those enterprise capabilities and secure the cloud capabilities, securing the cloud, there's some other focus areas, right? So we want to focus on visibility, compliance, and monitoring at the CSP level from a cloud network security. So, you know, what are we doing, you know, in those specific VPCs? And then some of the host security is some of the challenges. I'm going to move through this one here. The one thing I want to mention is we're seeing also a big transition to DevSecOps. So you've probably heard about this a million times over now, but there's some very innovative things that the DoD is doing. So once again, I don't speak to the DoD, but read the strategy. And one of the things that they're really trying to drive is kind of this idea of continuous compliance and authorization. So the idea is if we can kind of build a accredited platform and migrate applications to containers, and we have an ATO around this, if we're just building an app and putting it into this platform, essentially it's a risk-based decision to grant an ATO. So we're essentially seeing this concept of what they called fast-track ATO, is where it's more of this risk-based decision. If I can satisfy this criteria, it's inherent in core services, we essentially can accelerate the ATO, which is, I think, very, very innovative from a security perspective. But the one thing I would say is that, so we see there's a lot of things that are happening, I guess, within the Air Force and this unified platform and these kind of pathfinders around DevSecOps. So, we're seeing a lot of use of like Red Hat OpenShift, as well as some of the native like Kubernetes and Docker implementations. But the idea is, as we move to containers, it's another level in, right? So, as with moving to the cloud, we have to have security tools designed for the cloud. Well, now we have to have security tools designed for containers, and there's some differences there. So, there's actually a guide from NIST called 800-171, Securing Containers. One of the authors is one of the chief engineers at Twistlock. Twistlock is a good containerization platform. Actually, that's my next one. So here's an example of just some of the things that you can do. So like in a container, how do you do application firewalling? So there's some things there. The other interesting thing, and that I'll mention is, think of a developer. In a container, you're giving a developer access to the underlying security implementation. Well, that's with our users. I mean, there's a challenge there. So there's this principle where with a container, when I load an application, I want to also load the security tools independent of that container. That way, the developer can't mess up the application to make it insecure. Moving on here, we're also doing a lot of things with AI and machine learning with the cloud, in cyber. So anywhere from doing identity management, looking for malicious users, to predictive analysis at the endpoint, network defense, to driving automation, and we'll talk about some of the cool things that we're doing around automation. So if you haven't heard about SOAR, you should look into that. So there's this framework called the Integrated Adaptive Cyber Defense Framework, or IACD. This was a kind of a joint initiative led by Johns Hopkins APL, NSA, and DHS, and it's a framework to drive what I would call cyber automation. And then in 2018, Gartner came up with the SOAR, Security Orchestration and Automation Response Tool Market. So I kind of see, hey, this is your framework. These are the tools that you use to implement it. So if you've heard of Splunk's Phantom, or Palo Alto Demisto, or CyberSponse, or IBM Resilient, there's lots of SOAR tools out there, but the whole idea is they're going to plug into your CSPs, they're going to plug into your security tools, and they're going to provide an integrative way to automate some of your operations. We're seeing a much bigger drive of implementations in that. So definitely check those out. But one of the cool things is it's about kind of driving these automated playbooks, and we're mapping and you see a lot of the mapping done to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So if you have a certain threat actor with certain indicators of compromise, we can develop a playbook that aligns to what you would typically do to respond, and we can kind of share those playbooks amongst the enterprise, and that way it helps drive operationally how we defend against certain threat actors. So it's pretty cool, and with a lot of these SOAR platforms. they're basically developing these huge communities of playbooks, and they're sharing them around. So, and just here's an example, of hey, here's a common playbook that you could use to help drive, a certain event. So, and there's workflows, and they're extremely flexible. So one of the big questions I always get is, well, now that we're using AI, machine learning, automation, and SOAR, well, do we need humans anymore? And I think the answer is yes. This doesn't replace all them. We want to have a human in the loop, right? To make sure that, but at least now we have a better understanding of the common response actions. So we're doing a lot of work there within the cloud. The other thing is, there's kind of a gap here, right? I want to say, DISA is doing a very good job of kind of building these STIGs and best practices for implementation of like servers, but as we move into the cloud, we're not quite there with some of these benchmarks. So the best benchmarks that are out there right now is from the Center for Internet Security, or CIS. So if you notice, there's CIS benchmarks for AWS, like Google, Azure, and I'll show you some of those. But basically, it's a step-by-step checklist of the things that you should do to secure your cloud environment. So if there are some vendors out there that will actually using like APIs connect to your cloud environment and actually assess your environment. And we're actually slowly seeing that within the CSPs. So I'll show you Azure Security Center where they're actually doing the CIS check benchmarks against it. So just, the idea is you want to have good best practices to when you deploy a cloud environment to secure it. And then we have lots of cyber tools, and I'm going to get through this here. Here's an example of guard duty. So over in AWS, there's a tool called Guard Duty. It basically scans your environment for any attacks and reports on it, with very, very minimal implementation. So, you don't have to deploy another IDS or, oh, you had a question? Okay, sorry. It's also funny, like, I basically spooled up a server, and within like 30 minutes, I had adversaries trying to attack it. I think the important thing to note is, there's some of these ranges of IP address and entries are known, and there's a lot of things scanning these environments. So it's important to secure these environments. But the cool thing is it helps you easily basically identify kind of high findings. The second piece is there's a tool called AWS Macy. Macy provides the ability to kind of scan for sensitive data. So in the last couple of years, you probably saw there's a lot of newsworthy articles around S3 buckets getting compromised. So AWS rolled out a cool service for you to help identify what data is within your environment. So if you have PII or maybe credit card numbers, there's some things you can alert on. So here's an example, and here's some common indicators that they have. Is there credential loss or open permissions? I want to know the first thing that they did is probably let you know you had public S3 buckets. The other thing is, like Azure came out with something called a Security Center. So it was a way for them to kind of centralize a lot of the policy and technical controls around implementations of the CSPs. And I can show you that. So here's an example of just kind of all the things that you have access to that you can go through. And then like even OpenSCAP is good. I don't know if you've used that. A lot of it is around how do we do compliance and scoring around some of our operating system assets. And some of the CSPs are slowly actually building a lot of these STIGs within their AMI images. And I'll show you some of that. A lot of times we also are trying to drive this kind of zero trust strategy. So there's some other providers out there like Duo and Okta where they're integrating with the CSPs and providing the authentication access. So how do we actually look at behavioral health? So a good example, you check your enterprise email today. Well, is someone validating that your iPhone is the latest version? You patched it? Is it encrypted? I'm big on kind of behavioral health of your devices. And a lot of times, we'll use something like Splunk or Elastic to ingest a lot of the CSP data within a centralized location. One of the good things about using Splunk is they have actually an AWS connector or an Azure connector, which will actually pull the CloudWatch logs and stuff into a centralized location. So when you're managing multiple mission owners, multiple CSPs, having a tool like that is very important. And then we do a lot of auditing around 800-53 controls. So the more that we can automate this amongst mission owners, the better. So if you're using ACAS, ACAS is a really good tool to do that. AWS has their security hub. It's funny, one's called AWS Security Hub, the other one is Azure Security Center. Half of my time I spend learning the differences between AWS and Azure and Oracle, for my Oracle folks back there, and kind of how those things translate. And then back to Azure Security Center, they really give you a good synopsis of okay, what are you for policy compliance? What is your security hygiene? And I mean, there's a lot of good things that you can do analysis from. All right, I'm almost through the slides here. So lastly, I want to talk about some of the DoD use cases here. So if you're not familiar, one of the programs that we help build and operate is MilCloud 2.0. And there's some really cool reasons for using this. Let me move to here. And this is all on the MilCloud 2.0 website as part of DISA. So one of the benefits of using this cloud provider, it's IL5, it's within a DISA deck. You can MIPR funds to it. You can pay as you go. One of the other cool programs that we help support is the U.S. Navy for their cloud brokerage. So we're doing some cool things there. Navy, we're helping build an SCCA stack. We're doing some cool stuff with them. And then for the Air Force, we're helping them with some of their DevSecOps components. So this is all on the DoD website as part of their enterprise cloud strategy that I pulled from their strategy document. But they're doing some cool stuff with how they're driving containers to help improve the cybersecurity components. So notice, this is kind of the DevSecOps approach to, how they want to leverage a code repository, pipeline control, to kind of get them through the life cycle. But you have to have that similar tool set. But I feel like at some degree, the cybersecurity, CSPs are going to provide more of the resources, and it's kind of really building this platform on top of them. We'll see how it goes in a couple of years here, but but I feel like this is a very innovative concept. But I would look at the DoD Enterprise DevSecOps design. So lastly, how are we on time here?
We're good. We started 10 minutes late, so you have another 10 minutes.
Okay, cool. So I'm just going to show you guys two things real quick, and then we'll follow up here. So, all right. So one of the things I just wanted to show you is, we built a site out here. This is that tiny URL stuff. So if you go here, there's a checklist, and there's some resources that will actually go through some of the things that we talked about today. So. There's the pricing calculator, there's some of the impact level services in scope, there's some of the important Azure and AWS documentation, and we have some stuff on best practices.
So if you remember that URL that I showed at the very beginning, this is that site that you can get to after the session, because you're always like, oh, I should have asked this question, or oh, I wish I got that URL. Everything we're talked about today is on this site. So as long as you got that little URL, which we'll show again, and at the end, so you have that, so you can have access to this. And this is up live. We're not pulling it down.
Cool. Yeah, always like to make that available. So, so here's an example of a security center here. So if you can see that, this is one of my demo environments. So, it basically gives you an at-a-glance view of all the great things that are happening within this environment. So if I pull up a security center, so you can see, hey, it's doing regulatory compliance against, these controls. As I mentioned, there's the CIS benchmarks. Some of my resources need some security hygiene because I see a lot of red, which is probably bad, right? So there's some really, really cool stuff there. The other thing is, from an advisor perspective, it'll advise you on some of the security performance. One of the other things that I would mention is like from a multi-factor security. So probably one of the first things that you ever want to do is, ensure that your users have multi-factor authentication on. Passwords aren't just enough, so we need to make sure that we apply those. And even I mentioned automation and orchestration. There's some really cool, they have automation playbooks built in that you can actually apply to your environment. So you can get pretty sophisticated with coding some really cool stuff. And then from a management, over on the AWS side, they have a management console, and there, there's loads of stuff. And if you go over, they have a security hub. And, if you look at the console, I feel like Azure's is a little bit more complex. I think AWS is getting there. But I think Azure released theirs in 2016. I think AWS released theirs in 2019. So, it's the never-ending cloud battle. But, as you can see, there's a lot of findings that I need to fix, and you can see they're doing some of the CIS overlays. So I would definitely recommend looking into those CIS benchmarks, and I can show you that. So so back to the finalized thing here. Sure.
So Matt, I have a question about accountability in the cloud solution. If there is a data breach, who's responsible? Is it the cloud provider? Is it the system integrator?
Yes.
Is it the DoD organization? Who's accountable?
So most of the time it's the mission owner, right? So, and if there's a breach in the CSP, you're probably not going to hear about it per se, because that's, I want to say that goes up through the FedRAMP or whatever, and most of the time it's probably an issue with the mission owner. So normally, if you have a cybersecurity service provider or a CSSP, you're going to work with them and the mission owner to help remediate that. Question?
After this one's fixed up, I guess, but talking about mission owners and what's this, so what I can take back to my commander. Going to cloud services is outsourcing, right? Right now, the commander, when they're talking about their mission, they own it. They can set their assets the way they want. Right now, I'm going back to my commander going, oh, we want to outsource all this stuff. How do I assure him his mission is going to stay flexible? Any of us in the DoD have seen outsourcing attempts in the past, which have not given us some mission flexibility. I like your presentation from an IT standpoint, and IT is cool, right? We're all in it. But IT doesn't exist for IT. IT exists to support those mission owners. And how can I go back to my commander and go, you know what? Outsourcing is great. It's never worked before. They say it's going to be cheaper, but it's not yet. We're not, I'm trying to get what is the so what impact from your discussion? I can go back to my commander
Yeah.
I love you guys' presentation, but I'm having a real hard time coming up with a so what today.
So I think if I could put in the simple elevator pitch, it helps streamline capability quickly. Like, so, you don't have to worry about building this entire infrastructure. It's there, it's available, you spool it, and you can easily inherit those capabilities. If that makes sense.
It really boils down to scalability, because you have finite resources sitting in your data center today. And if something happens and you got, what happens if you got to expand? You got to go procure more hardware, more software. That takes time. In the cloud, it's there instantly. It's instant on. You hit it, it's there. But it's pay as you go. In your current data center, it's CapEx. You got so much budget. It's a shrinking budget, most likely. You can't always buy all the equipment you need. The cloud is an OpEx. And so it's up, you're powered on, you're spending money. You power it off, you're not spending money. So that's the biggest thing, is that scalability on demand when you need it. And sometimes that's the reason why the hybrid works so well, because there are certain workloads that you're going to run all the time. Keep them on-prem. But that demand, that surge and stuff, use the cloud.
So yeah, we're looking at a hybrid solution more, but again, it's kind of, again, it needs a lot of purpose of what you're talking about there. That
Yeah.
instant scalability.
So I think it's sometimes harder if you look at it just infrastructure and infrastructure, but the reality is it's kind of all about these services, and I think we're moving to this kind of services type cloud economy, right? So you may have some really cool AI tools, and you can quickly consume it in the cloud. So I want to say, like, as we drive into the future, we're going to see hundreds of services probably at different accreditations, and it basically now I don't have to build the service from scratch. It's just available to start using. So the idea is, as a mission owner, you can focus on the mission and not building infrastructure and building functions and building applications, because it should be there.
The cost benefits actually when you move up the stack. When you're at infrastructure, it's just like having in a data center. It's when you move up to platform and software as a service is where you get the thing. Because think about it, if I'm running database as a service in the cloud, I don't have to worry about the patching of the database. I don't have to worry about patching of the OS. I just have to worry about the schema and the data flowing in and out and the right applications hitting it. Then I can free up that admin that was worried about patching to do something else. So you're getting that capability that you don't get today in your legacy data center.
Cool. Alrighty. So to finalize this, I always like to end with, if I look at some of the mature cloud cyber operations out there, in order to defend against threats, there's kind of 4 areas that I think are important. The first thing is, you have to know what you have. You can't defend what you don't know you have, right? It's that shadow IT aspect. And you have to build resilience early. I think cloud is a true enabler for that. They help you build resilience, and because all your assets are there, you know what you have. The second piece is you have to kind of really standardize on what your cyber tools are. 150 tools doesn't necessarily help, right? So what are those core foundational tools that are part of your CSP monitoring? Third thing is automation. So the more that we can integrate, the more that we can automate, the better it is for our cyber ops. And then lastly, you have to have skilled cyber teams. And I feel like having some core, Azure expertise and AWS and Oracle and Google is important. The important thing is adversaries thrive in complexity. So the more complex that you make these environments, the much harder it is for it to be secured, as well as it makes it easier for our adversary to break in. So that being said, we Tuesday, November 19th, that is today, from 6:30 to 9:30, we're throwing a great party. So make sure you take a note of that. Come by our booth. You're all invited. And me and Neil, thank you for coming to our session.
Go back to the slide, show the URL. The URL.
Oh, yeah. Which one was
The
that?
agenda slide.
Cool.
But yeah, thanks for coming. We'll stick around for a little while if you got any questions. We'll also be at the booth if you want to come by, have a deeper conversation. Happy to do that. So, and like I said, thank you for attending. Have a great day. Have a great conference. It was great to see this many people show up on the first session. So,
Awesome.
no, go back to the slide 2.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Yep, thank you.
Nice presentation.